and welcome to the Jayda InStitches show. We have one last little tutorial to sneak in for you before we swoop into 2024. A little while ago during a live stream, we showed you this little guy. This is Rudolf, or at least it's his head. This is a little tree ornament, but of course he would make a cute pin or even a magnet too. Now, I gave him embroidered eyes, and I'm going to explain how to do that in today's tutorial, but I'm also going to show you how to just add beads. So if you're a little pressed for time and you want something simpler in the eyeball department, then beads will work just fine. But I also think he'd be cute with googly eyes or safety eyes or even buttons if that's all you've got. So let's grab our hooks, grab our yarn, we'll head on over to the craft table, and we'll stitch up a couple of last-minute gifts together. In order to make our little Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer ornament for the tree, you're going to need some size 4 medium weight acrylic yarn. You don't need very much, maybe about 10 yards of your brown reindeer color, a couple yards of your beige for your little antlers. I used a bit of orange here, and maybe 1 yard for red for the nose. Now if you want, you could also put a great big red bead nose here instead of crocheting it, but I'm going to show you how to crochet it just in case you want to do that. You're also going to want a little bit of hanging thread or ribbon or cord so you can hang them up. If you want to embroider his eyes, I used embroidery floss here, but today I'm going to use a couple of beads. So I've got a couple of blue beads here. If you're going to use beads, you're going to want a sewing needle and thread, a pair of scissors, a yarn needle, and we're using a 5.5mm hook, also known as an eye or a 9. And once you've got all that together, we can get started. We're going to make our little reindeer head from the bottom of his chin all the way up to the top of his head and his ears, all in one piece. So let's start with our reindeer color. We're going to make a cinch circle. So you want to take your yarn and cross it, pick up a loop on your hook, and chain 1 to secure it in place. We're going to use the single crochet stitch. So into that cinch circle, working over top of your short tail, you're going to work 6 single crochet. Once you have 6 single crochet all worked into that little circle, cinch it up nice and tight. We are not joining our row with a slip stitch. We are instead going to work directly into the very next stitch. You can use a stitch marker if you want to keep track of that first stitch of the row. I'm going to work over top of my short tail, but you can also leave it to the back. It'll just end up on the inside of your reindeer head, so there's nothing wrong with that. We are going to single crochet in each stitch all the way around. So single crochet into the very first stitch of what was row 1, and single crochet into each of the next 5 stitches. You'll still have 6 stitches all the way around, and we're just creating a little chin for our reindeer. You can poke the chin out, sort of roll it back over top of your finger. That's row 2 complete. We are going to do the same thing now for row 3. You're just single crocheting in each stitch all the way around. I find it easiest to count to 6, but you can also mark the first stitch of the row with a stitch marker. You will still have 6 stitches at the end of row 3. We've got a little bit of a chin happening here for our little reindeer, and now we're going to work an increase row. We are going to work 2 single crochet into each stitch all the way around. So we're going to go from a stitch count of 6 up to 12. You might find it helpful to mark that first stitch of the row with a stitch marker or just your yarn needle, whatever you find close at hand, unless you want to just count 2 single crochet into each stitch, knowing that you'll be up to 12 when you get back to the beginning. At the end of row 4, you'll be up to 12 stitches, and you'll have something that looks like this. For rows 5, 6, and 7, we are just going to single crochet in each stitch all the way around. So you might find it helpful to mark the first stitch of your row with a little stitch marker or a piece of yarn or whatever you've got, unless you're kind of uninterrupted and you can just count to 12 all the way around 3 times. So rows 5, 6, and 7, We are just single crocheting in each stitch all the way around. We will have 12 stitches at the end of every row, and I'll see you at the end of row 7. Once you've single crocheted into every stitch all the way around for 3 rows, you'll still have 12 stitches at the end of row 7. We are just going to single crochet now into each of the next 3 stitches. This just evens up the end of row 7. And now we are going to create ears and a seam. So if you flatten out your little piece of crochet, you are now looking at the front of his little face. So let's make an ear. We're going to chain 4. We are going to skip the first chain from the hook, find the second one, and slip stitch into that second chain. We're going to single crochet into the next chain, and we're going to half double crochet into the last chain. So half double crochet into the last chain, and then you're going to slip stitch back into that same stitch that you left from. And there's his little ear. Now we are going to single crochet through each of the, I guess there's going to be about 6 sets of stitches all the way along here. So you're just going to pass your hook through the first set of stitches and single crochet, and you're going to single crochet through each set. So you see I'm passing my hook right through the very middle. I'm getting both of those stitches because I am seaming up the top. And then I'm just going to slip stitch into this last little kind of corner right at the other side so that I can go ahead and make his second ear. And ear number 2 is made the same as ear number 1. We're going to chain 4, skip the first chain from the hook and slip stitch into the second, single crochet into the third, and into that last chain, half double crochet, and then you're just going to slip stitch right back into that same place. There you go. So now you've got 2 little ears, one out either side of his little deer face, and you can fasten off. You don't need any tail, just enough to weave it in back and forth a couple times just to make sure it doesn't want to come undone. And then if there's anything left, you can just pull it to the inside of the head. Next we want to add some antlers to his little head. So we're going to grab our antler color. We're going to start with a slip knot on our hook. And we're going to join our yarn 2 stitches in. So here we are in the second stitch in from the end. So if you're looking at all those stitches that run across the top of his head, come into the second one. You're going to join your yarn with a slip stitch, and we're going to chain 6. We're going to slip stitch into the second, third, and fourth chains from the hook. So you skip the first chain, slip stitch into the second, slip stitch into the third, and slip stitch into the fourth chains from the hook. And now we want to create a little extra piece to his antler. So we're going to chain 3. We're going to skip the first chain from the hook, slip stitch into the second chain, into the third, and then back into the same place that that last chain and that last slip stitch was. So you're just sort of anchoring it right there. So those 2 pieces all both end in the same chain. And then you're just going to slip stitch into the remaining 2 chains on that first chain of 6 and back into the same place that you joined your yarn. So another slip stitch to anchor it. And that is antler number 1. You can fasten off. And I like to take both of those little ends and tie them in a tiny little knot, nice and tight. And then you can pull both of these ends into the inside of the head. So you just grab your yarn needle, pull them into the inside of the head. I like to get my needle in there. There we go. Have it come out the bottom, make sure it's not poking through to the other side. Grab both those ends. Let's try that again. There we go. And just pull them up into the body. Adds a little bit of extra stuffing, and it's a nice way to get both of those ends in. Then you're going to repeat exactly the same thing on the other side of his head. You're going to come in 1 or 2 stitches away from the ear. So if you want them both in the middle of the head, you're going to have maybe 1, maybe 2 stitches in between. Your stitches may not be exactly the same alignment as mine, so just decide where you want that antler to sit. You want them both sort of sitting relatively in the middle of his head with a little bit of space in between. Repeat exactly the same thing as you did for the other antler. Next we want to add his little nose, just like we've got here. So here you can use a bead if you want, or a pom-pom or something really cute like that. But if you want to crochet one, here's how I did mine. We're going to start with a cinch circle, just like we did with his nose at the bottom of his face. And into that circle we're going to single crochet 4 times. So just 4 little stitches into that cinch circle. And that is it. You can cinch up the circle, find the first stitch and slip stitch to it to join. Now this is a very small little piece of crochet, so you're going to leave yourself a little bit of tail just so you can sew it down. I like to sort of push my stitch tops to the back so I get like a little kind of bump like this. Leave yourself enough tail that you can sew it to his face. You won't need very much because you've only got 4 little stitches to sew down. And you can pull this little short tail, so the other little tail, into his head, and we'll do that in a moment. So first, you're going to thread up that tail left behind, the longer one. You're going to position it on his face, and you can sort of decide where you want it. And I recommend just sort of anchoring that nose with a stitch first. See, I'm just grabbing the top piece of a stitch of his face and I'm going through a stitch on the actual nose. So I've just anchored it with that, and now I'm going to reach my needle into the head. So I'm making sure that it's fully inside. I'll just bring it out here, and I'm going to take that short tail and just pull it into the head of the reindeer, and that will also help to anchor my nose. Now I'll worry about weaving that in a minute, and then I can go back to sewing down my little nose. And like I said, you've only got 4 little stitches, so you just want to make sure that you're getting each one of them. And you can sew down the same place a couple times if you feel like it's not secure enough. There we go. And once you're done, just make yourself a little knot at the side of the nose. Itty bitty tiny little knot. And then you can pull the tail into the head of the reindeer, just like we did with the short tail. And then get your needle in there and wiggle it around until they both disappear. So, a little tiny knot at the side, that just helps keep it from wanting to undo. And then his nose really sticks out. Get your needle into the head, again making sure that you're not accidentally coming through both sides. Pull that tail in. They're both there. And then you can just wiggle your needle around on the inside. Grab those tails and wiggle it back and forth until they both get pulled in. Now we're just going to add some eyes. I'll be sewing on a couple of little blue beads for eyes today, but if you wanted to embroider them like I did here, you just want a little bit of white embroidery floss. You would take your needle in to the inside of the head, just make a couple little loops over top of one stitch, and then over here do the other. Pull the needle back out through the same place it came in. Knot your ends together, pull the ends inside the head of the reindeer, just like I did there. And then same thing with the black. I just did a couple of little stitches over top of the white with the black, which I thought was kind of cute. Gives them a bit of a derpy look. But I'm going to just use blue beads today. I'm going to give them a pair of blue eyes, nice and simple. So I'm going to sew mine on. I've decided I kind of want them in the same, roughly the same place, so sort of the upper part of his face. I've knotted the ends of my thread together, and I'm just going to put my needle and thread in roughly where I want it. I want the bead to sit, and I will tuck that little end in. First bead goes on. And I'm going to make sure that it sits right over top of where my knot was, making sure my yarn or my thread doesn't twist. And I'm going to sew that bead down a couple of times before I zip over and sew down the other one. So I'm going to sew that one down a couple more times, but first I'm going to go in and zip across to the other side of the head. And sew down number 2. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to sew it down a couple times in place, making sure it's roughly opposite my other eye. And when you're sewing down a button, especially a round one, you want to make sure that you are entering and exiting your fabric a little bit beyond where the exact edge of the bead is. This will help keep your thread from not showing as much, and it'll kind of help recess those little round beads into the stitches in which they're sitting. So you want to just sew a little wider, just a smidgen wider than the bead is in its diameter, and press the bead down a little bit as you pull tightly on the thread, and that will just help keep it in place. And once that one's down, I'm going to bring my needle back across and through my other bead. I'm going to make a little tiny knot at the side, and then I will take my thread into the body of the reindeer. So I'm always going to like to knot it at least twice. Sometimes I need to pull on both threads just to make sure it's nice and tight. There we go. Then I'm just going to tuck my needle right through the body, pull it out the back, and trim. And then I'll pull it just a little tightly as I trim it, not so much that I accidentally cut the crochet, and then anything else will just be kind of sort of pulled back into the body. There's his little face. Now all we have to do is put on his little string. So let's grab a bit of thread. I've got some crochet thread here. You can use, ribbon, cord, whatever you've got lying around. cut a decent length, I'd say 30 centimeters or 12 inches. And we're going to tie the ends together. And then I'm just going to poke my needle right through the top middle stitch of his head. I'm going to pull the looped end of that little tie through his head, take the knotted end and pull it through the folded thread, and there we go. Easy way to add a little tie. And that is a little reindeer head, all ready to hang on the tree. And there you go. Whether you decide to embroider eyes or stitch on some beads or just glue on some googly eyes, that is one cute, quick, last-minute little ornament gift idea. And I mean, who doesn't like Rudolph? We hope you enjoyed today's little last-minute tutorial, and we will see you soon here on the Jayda and Stitches show. Until then, stay safe, stay crafty, have an absolutely wonderful holiday, and we will see you in 2024. Bye, everybody!
Merry Christmas, everyone! This is Mr. InStitches. Thank you for watching. We want to wish you and your loved ones the very best of the season, and we'll see you next year.